This is Covering the Spread. Here are your hosts, Jim Saunders and Dr. Ed Feng.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome on into Covering the Spread. That's right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network and numberFire.com as we're taking a look at some men's college basketball and a little bit of the NBA as well, with John Ewing of the Action Network breaking down his thoughts on some teams you can buy low on right now and a couple of futures bets as well. My name is Jim Saunders. I am a senior writer and analyst for numberFire.com, joined here as always by Ed Feng. You can find his work over at thepowerrank.com. Ed, happy Wednesday to you. How you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Digging deeper into college basketball, and then had the pleasure of turning on the NBA All-Star Game randomly on Sunday night.
What happened there? I gotta admit, I was watching rain delay coverage of the Daytona 500. I chose to watch driver interviews and a replay of last year's race over the NBA All-Star Game, which is why we're having John talk basketball today and not me. What happened? I did not see a single minute of this.
So I don't know if I would have turned it on. All-Star games are pretty typically boring, a lot of offense, no one plays defense. But I got a notification, and it was interesting. They're like, fourth quarter, Team LeBron versus Team Giannis, goal score 157. So they changed the format of it, where instead of playing to a clock, you're playing to a score. So it ends up being great because there's no chance for intentional fouling at the end of the game.
True. Okay.
And it changed the complete dynamic of the game. Like you have never, it was like a pickup game that every one of those guys wanted to win. There was more defense in that quarter of All-Star basketball than maybe combined in the history of the All-Star game. It was really incredible. And, I think it was like Team LeBron, they needed 3 points to win. And obviously, like, it completely changes the game, right? Because now you must defend the 3-point line. And Giannis was guarding LeBron, and LeBron, he was clearly not going to let him shoot. And so LeBron goes around them for what looked like a pretty easy layup. And Giannis comes out and blocks it. They called it a goaltend. It was actually a good block. They reviewed it. The game still got slowed down a little bit by reviews, but it was incredible. Like the excitement of that game, a couple other people I talked to really enjoyed it. Other people who had never, hadn't turned on an All-Star game in years. I think the players really enjoyed it. And I think we're getting in this era in the NBA where you're going to start seeing competitions outside of the regular season and the playoffs. There's been a lot of talk about having a midseason tournament in February when there's not a lot going on in the tournament, playing for a cup, similar to how European soccer teams do. And I think with the excitement that this All-Star game generated with this format, you could see that format going into that tournament. And I think that would be incredible for the sport of basketball.
Right. I think that's also very interesting because it was the year I met you at Sloan. I believe that was that year Adam Silver was talking, and they say they look at League Pass data and they know when people tune out of games. And one of the areas they wanted to improve was the last 2 minutes because, like you said, people are fouling, and it makes it kind of unwatchable. So I think this format being successful in that respect is interesting given that I know they are looking at that. Like the NBA has a lot of very smart people involved with it. I know that they're seeing that. I'm sure that you probably had a similar thought too. Were you at that Adam Silver talk?
I was at that Adam Silver talk. And actually just recently, I think it was this past year where Daryl Morey mentioned this idea of playing to a score instead of a clock. And I think it's brilliant. And like, I think it's less. I mean, I agree with you that there's a lot of smart people in the NBA, but I think it's more the leadership to think differently and not to be stuck in an NFL mindset where you're not even going to put advertisements on your jersey, So I think it's really, I think so many things in life are less about brains and more about a desire, like just a capacity to think a little bit outside the box.
Right.
And I think you saw a great example of that Sunday night.
I think that's also very interesting because like the NFL has tried things during the Pro Bowl to make that like watchable, like sideline player interviews, and like you're seeing the XFL do that in regular season games.
Right.
Don't think that's a coincidence because like the Pro Bowl, I watch it because I have heavy DFS interest usually. I will fully admit that's the reason. But like seeing the player interviews makes it more watchable than it would be previously. So we've seen good ideas come from like funky All-Star formats before. And like when I heard the idea for the All-Star game, I was like, this is way too confusing. I don't want to try that hard to think about it. But like, you're not the only person who has praised it. I think Bill Simmons was talking about how like it was a good format this week too. So it's really interesting that it's gotten such good reviews.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like, I think it'll be a real shot in the arm for basketball in general. I think this is really the way to go. You know, because I always talk about like love basketball, love football, but my favorite sport to watch is international soccer. And a big reason for that is just the flow. You know, the game flows towards the end. There's not the stoppages that you see. And if you could get just even better, I mean, still you're gonna still get frustrated with basketball with all the reviews, but it's a lot better.
Interesting. We'll have to keep track of that for sure. And if anyone's going to Sloan this year, maybe see if you can get some more insights on that and what the plans are for that as well. Are you going to Sloan this year, Ed?
Yep, I'll be there.
Okay, so you are our beat reporter on the ground.
The beat reporter on the ground. Does that mean I actually have to go to sessions, or can I just tell you what the bettors are saying in
you
bars
can make things up and I'll never know. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. So you have free reign to do as you need.
We're
going to talk more college basketball and more NBA in a second with John Ewing. You can find his stuff over at the Action Network. He's a betting analyst there. College basketball, his process, whether he sees value in NBA futures right now. With the offseason being here, though, we do have an interesting schedule for covering the spread, so make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread to get every podcast right as it is posted. Don't have to worry about seeing our tweets about it or anything. You can just get a push notification right as it goes up by searching for Covering the Spread. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you are, we are as well. And if you're listening to Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review as well. Before we get to John, speaking of a lot of delays late in the contest, we had to go back through the Daytona 500. A lot of delays there and a scary incident at the end that apparently has a happy ending. We're going to go through that, and then we'll get to John in just 1 second.
Covering the past.
All right, so last week on Covering the Spread, we had a discussion about the Daytona 500 from a betting perspective, and the one big bet that came from that, at least for me, was Chris Buescher to win at 75-1. And we had actually talked about that in December as well, because Buescher opened at 75-1, didn't get any closing line value, which was shocking to me. No closing line value at FanDuel. He was 40-1 other places, so closing line value elsewhere. So he closed 75-1. And he still almost paid off. He was actually running in the top 5 late in this race. And then there was a big crash in front of him because it's Daytona, and he went to the grass to avoid it. And Nick Costos of You Better You Bet was messaging me because I talked about Buescher on their show too. And he's like, is he done? And I'm like, no, he has to pit. He has to get the grass taken off his car. It's suboptimal, but like he's still alive. And he restarted 15th. And he had a fast car, so he actually worked his way forward. He was running 5th, and then with 2 laps left, Buescher got this massive run, and he went 4 wide on the front stretch. And he was actually on the outside of Denny Hamlin, who was leading, and was about to take the lead with 2 laps left, but then there was another huge wreck behind him, and the caution came out. So what they do is, we were talking about loops last week, the loop data, and they go back to the last loop they passed before the caution came out. And at that last loop, Buescher was in second behind Hamlin. So he restarts second. I was actually okay with that because Hamlin chose the outside line, which is statistically the better line, and it was smart of him to do so, but that put Buescher on the inside. And that means he had Kevin Harvick and Clint Boyer behind him, and those are 2 Fords. Hamlin had no Toyotas in the top 15 with him. He was a lone ranger. So Buescher's in a really good spot. He didn't get a very good restart from second, though, and he slipped to third, and then the caution came out again because there was another wreck right away. So another restart. Buescher's restarting third, 2 laps to go. But he was right behind his teammate, Ryan Newman, and you probably know that name now of Ryan Newman. The outside got a better restart because Ryan Blaney was starting 4th, and he had a really fast car, and he basically just bullied Hamlin forward. And Buescher couldn't keep up with Newman. He kind of drifted back to 5th. Got a really good push, I think, from David Reagan. And Buescher was back up to 4th on the front stretch. And then you've seen this by now. Blaney was trying to pass Newman. Newman blocked him. Blaney said, whatever, I give up. I'll just push it forward to a win. And then he hooked Newman. huge wreck, and it almost opened up the window for Buescher. Buescher finished third, so at 75-1, I like that process, but like, it was really hard to get too excited given what happened with Ryan Newman. Now, thankfully, like today, finally we got good news. Like apparently he is walking. There was a picture from Roush Fenway Racing with him and his daughters, like standing up and smiling. He is intact, and like I haven't felt that way in a long time from a NASCAR race. Like the fright, honestly, of like having all that go down. But thankfully he is okay. And because he's relatively okay, I can, feel better about the Buescher bet. But like, that was a wild and scary night Monday with all the stuff. Were you paying attention to that at all as it was going down?
Yeah, I watched a little bit of it. Definitely caught the replay of the wreck the next day. It was Sunday, right? Not Monday.
It was Monday night, yeah, because it got postponed by rain.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It was Monday night.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely saw, more NASCAR than I probably have, the recent memory. So
yeah.
So it's good to engage in new things.
Absolutely. And I got a tweet from someone too saying they watched the race because of the podcast. They got some interest from it. So that was definitely good interacting with them. And thankfully everything with Newman looks like it'll wind up being okay, because like it's been really weird to talk about NASCAR this week. It's just like it's been so scary, but
right.
He sounds like he's going to be okay. And we can feel better about Buescher finishing third then, even though it didn't quite pay off. Hopefully you got an each way from your book. I didn't mention that at FanDuel. Probably should have, but for those of you who got a top 3 each way, got paid out. So congrats to those of you who did. And if you want to get in on the action, make sure you check out the FanDuel Sportsbook and place your first bet today. If you lose, FanDuel will give you a refund of up to $500 in site credit. Visit sportsbook.fanduel.com for more details. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 plus and physically present in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, or Indiana. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's shift focus now and bring on John Ewing. Find him on Twitter at John Ewing. He is a betting analyst for the Action Network. We're going to break down men's college basketball, NBA, talk some futures, talk some March Madness, and get his thoughts on things as they stand right now.
Covering the present.
Let's bring John Ewing into covering the spread to talk a little bit of men's college basketball and some NBA. John, welcome to the show. How you doing today?
Thanks for having me on, fellas. I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you here as well. Now, we're going to talk about a couple different things. We're going to go through Bet Labs at the Action Network. We're going to talk men's college basketball and the NBA. But first, I saw you tweeting about the Daytona 500. I am also, I love NASCAR. We were talking about it last week on the show. How did things go for you down in Daytona?
Ended up coming out ahead. Thankfully, I had Buescher in the top 3. He was a long shot, so he got home for me. Other than that, it was looking to be disastrous. But when you bet on cars going in circles and there's a lot of wrecks, that's bound to happen.
Absolutely. Chris Buescher, I will say he is the official driver of covering the spread. So I am fully on board with that. There were a lot of like NASCAR people in on Buescher. So I know that PJ Walsh was talking about him too last week. So it was always good to be rooting for the same guy there for sure. Now, John, you work for the Action Network, and you've got a thing called Bet Labs there that stores tons of historic data for bets. You can tweet out a bunch of different trends. For people who don't know what Bet Labs is, how can that be applied for placing your bets?
Well, I think all gamblers have theories, right? Teams score less in cold weather. You should fade squads on back-to-backs, etc. And Bet Labs gives you the ability to test theories, see what's true, what's not. It's kind of like myth busting, but for sports betting. And so with our massive database, you can test almost any theory you have. And then if you find something that's interesting, you can get alerts set up so that when games match, you have an opportunity to profit.
Excellent. So a lot of that part is finding trends. Is there any general advice you have about either searching for trends or following trends that other people post?
Yeah, I mean, always sample size matters, right? It depends on sport, but the more games, the more consistently profitable it has, the more confidence you can, lend a trend or a system going forward. And in general, where I have most success is going against common held beliefs, which often means betting against the public. So just to kind of go back on that, like teams in cold weather and scoring, we often see, and this is usually media driven when you talk about football games, the NFL, if it's going to be, 10 degrees in Lambeau, that's always a storyline leading up to kickoff. And you'll often see the under getting a ton of action because, again, casual bettors just think it's cold outside, players don't want to be hit. That leads to lower scoring. But we've seen historically that really cold temperatures don't matter all that much. Overs have hit about 57% of the time when it's 32 degrees or colder outside. So kind of going against the grain, again, going against common held beliefs has historically provided betting opportunities.
Did you say 57% go over when it's below freezing?
Yeah, so in general, so that's since 2003. And if you kind of look at the closing total, usually the lower the total, obviously the easier it is for a game to go over.
Right.
So in lower total games with cold temperatures. So again, that just, games tend to have lower totals in cold weather because bettors will bet the under and odds makers will force them to take bad numbers.
Interesting.
That's super interesting. Is it weird for you to be going so heavily against the public a lot of times? Like, I know that like we want to try to exploit the public, but it is kind of strange to be kind of on an island a lot of times. Does that make you nervous at all, betting against where a lot of the money is going so often?
No, only because so often the public is wrong, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason, the casinos exist out in Vegas.
Yeah.
The odds makers always win. So being on the same side as the bookmakers tends to be a profitable long-term strategy.
Absolutely. So let's talk about your process more broadly with men's college basketball betting. Do you have your own numbers you lean on? Do you try to pinpoint certain stats that are bound to regress? Do you look for the trends you were just talking about? What's your process when it comes to men's college basketball?
As much information as possible. I want it all. So, we have power ratings at the Action Network. My colleague, Sean Corner, creates those for us. So that's always a great starting point. Of course, you have Bet Labs, which can highlight, great situations or profitable situations. We track, ticket and money percentages as well at Sports Insights, which can kind of highlight maybe where some sharp moves are going. And of course, there's a bunch of analysts at the Action Network that write up college basketball on a daily basis. So when I try to consume all of that information, whenever all of those factors line up, that's where I've had the most success betting on college basketball.
Excellent. So, John, you most recently wrote a piece about the value of targeting teams that have struggled against the spread as bookmakers start to bake that in. Are there any college teams that stand out right now that you can take advantage with this idea?
Yeah. So when is this going up? Are your listeners going to be able to be active on this by tomorrow?
Tonight,
yes.
Honestly,
Tonight?
because it should be up by, I would say, 3:00 on Wednesday at the latest.
Okay, well then I got a bunch of game matches here for you.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
You guys are going to say that. Yeah, you guys were talking about bad against the spread teams. I was looking at, just a real simple strategy. Bet bad teams against the spread against opponents that have winning ATS records. And, again, casual bettors are victim to recency bias. If a team fails to cover, they tend to bet against them. If one is consistently cashing tickets for them, then they're going to be on them again the next game. So again, odds makers understand these tendencies and then they will adjust lines accordingly. So historically, when you bet a bad team, I defined it as covered only about 1 in every 3 games. When they face a winning against the spread opponent in conference games, they've covered 56% of the time with over a 3,000 game sample since 2005. So ton of games, really consistent winner, has returned a profit in 10 straight seasons. This year, this system is 89, 62, and 5. So that's a 59% win rate against the spread. So again, huge sample, consistent results, something that can, you might say, okay, I'm not a trend better, but at least this can point you in the right direction and you can use power ratings or models to help, confirm this data. But some matches for tonight: Vodtech against Miami, North Dakota against South Dakota State, Illinois State against Loyola Chicago, Wofford against NC Greensboro. So those are just a few this evening that match this system where you're going to take a team that has not been covering and historically the data says they're going to be undervalued.
At what point in the year does that start to work out? Because a lot of time in the year where you may see teams covering the spread because they were undervalued coming into the year, is this like a February thing where you start to buy into stuff like this, trying to, go once we have a large enough sample on these teams?
Right. So, I mean, these are in-conference games. So when the calendar flips and you start seeing more conference matchups, that's when this system starts kicking in.
Okay, interesting. Now, speaking of that, we got a pretty good sample on all the teams now, meaning we can see some teams that could be due for some regression. That could be another thing we could be looking for here. Do any teams stand out to you right now as having unsustainable performances that could present betting opportunities, whether it be for them or against them?
Yeah, one team that I thought of was Arizona State. They're just a half game behind Oregon and Colorado in the Pac-12. They won 5 in a row, but most of those have come against teams in the bottom half of the conference. They're 17th right now in Ken Palm's luck rating, which looks at their actual record versus expected. They're 10th right now in free throw percentage in the Pac-12, while their opponents are shooting the second worst mark against them. And that's another area where I've looked at some of the stats. Free throw percentage for and against is pretty much luck. And so that's one area where you can kind of target a team that's unfortunately had opponents make a high percentage of free throws against them, where you could see that kind of flip later in the season. So Arizona State, definitely an opportunity there. They're playing Oregon on Thursday, so that's going to be a step up in competition. I like the Ducks there against Arizona State.
Excellent. So, John, you were mentioning before the show that you've been working on a tournament model for college basketball. Is there any insights into college basketball futures from that model?
Yeah, so I just ran 10,000 simulations of the most recent bracketology from Joe Lenardi using our power ratings for college basketball. And what stands out to me is that we are much higher on the top favorites than the market is right now. So you're talking like Kansas, Gonzaga, Duke. We see it maybe leaning a little more chalk this year. Right now, Kansas is sitting in that like 9-1 future odds. And by our model, we have them as the most likely champion, winning it about 20% of the time. So fair odds for them would be about 4-1. So there's definitely some value there on the Jayhawks. When you kind of look at some of their underlying numbers, they're one of the top 10 in both offensive and defensive efficiency, according to Ken Palm. So this is a really good balanced team that maybe the market isn't as high on as our numbers.
Interesting. That's really interesting too. Kansas 8-1 over at FanDuel Sportsbook as of right now. And John, is this the first year you've done the simulations in February? Because I think it's very interesting because it's going to account for seeding, potential seeding, hypothetical stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of value in that. Have you done this in the past as well, or is this the first time you've done this?
We've done this for the last 2-3 seasons now. I'm thinking we would always do a preseason, and then starting after the NFL ended, when more interest in college basketball starts picking up, start running these numbers every week. And that's what I'm going to do going forward. So we'll see how seeding changes with, bracketology, which then obviously impacts some of our projections here. But in general, right now, sitting about a month out from Selection Sunday, it looks like the Jayhawks have some value. I put a unit on them just for some action.
That's interesting, John. Would you maybe suggest waiting until after this weekend, just because if they lose to Baylor, you maybe get a better number on it?
That's true. Yeah, that's a really good tip right there. And that's something where, if you look at your numbers and you say, yeah, Baylor's going to win this match. I bet against Baylor last night. They keep burning me. Our power ratings had that game Bears -1. I got it 3.5. They're really good. So yeah, Kansas is going to have their hands full this week. If they do fall, that number could slide to maybe 10-1.
Yeah. So we were talking about Baylor last week, actually, or 2 weeks ago, with Ken Barkley, Lockie Lockerson, and he was talking about Baylor too, and they've been a pretty big talking point from a betting perspective. What's been your read on them? Like, you said you bet against them. The numbers said you bet against them. Are you expecting regression to happen, or are you just going to hold off and just forego them for a while?
Yeah, the thing with Baylor is They're number one right in the AP poll. So often casual bettors look at that and they say, okay, they're clearly the best team. But the underlying numbers, at least according to our power ratings, make them more like the fourth or fifth best team in the country. So it's Kansas, Duke, Gonzaga, and then just underneath them is Baylor. So while they are very good, they're maybe not as good as the ratings suggest, which often influences spreads and the betting odds. So you can find value betting against them. When I do, though, they keep making me look silly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually watched a bunch of the game at Oklahoma last night, and while it's kind of like a team that I kind of want to root for in the tournament if they weren't a number one seed, because it's really like a very cohesive team. There's no NBA lottery pick on that team, but they move the ball around well, play good defense. But they're probably going to be a number one seed, so they're gonna be the favorite going in. It'll be interesting to see how everything shakes out.
Yeah, John. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say, by our simulations, they would be one of the one seeds that we would avoid.
Okay.
Just because, again, Kansas, Duke, Gonzaga, we have them much more likely to reach the Final Four. So that would be, if Baylor is a one seed, they're probably one that I'm looking to fade when I'm filling out my bracket. At least,
we will
again,
certainly
30 days out from the tournament.
Oh, yeah, we're going to get plenty more tournament talk before things tip off, and I'm looking forward to that. It's always fun to talk to Ed about that, so definitely a good time of year for that. Now, John, while we have you here, might as well talk a little bit of NBA as well, because end of the All-Star break is coming up, and on the Action Network, you recently created a consensus NBA championship projection. You used a couple of different rating systems, compared that to where the betting odds were at. Did any team stand out to you as being profitable futures bets after going through that exercise?
Yeah, the NBA is one of the sports where I don't have a simulation model. But what you can do, and it's really simple for any of your listeners that are looking to play some future bets, just go gather as much information as you can. Like I looked at ESPN, numberFire, Basketball Reference, get all of their projections, and then just create, an average projection for each team. It's really simple. You get a bunch of models and inputs that are theoretically all independent of each other, which should create some value as long as they line up. And according to this consensus projection, there's three clear favorites to win it all. It's the Lakers, Bucks, and Clippers. They're all sitting at like 3-1 or better. Every other team is in the double digits. But the Bucks stand out far and above. According to these models, they have about a 43% chance to win the NBA championship. So even though you're only getting about plus 260 on them, there's still value. You could bet it down to about plus 140 based on those. And it's really, betting on Milwaukee, it's not too hard to make a case for them. They have the best record in the NBA, second in offense, first in defensive efficiency, and they have some guy named Giannis who's like 30 points and 14 rebounds per game. So I really like them. I was on them last year at 10-1, and obviously disappointing when they blow a 2-0 lead to Kawhi and the Raptors. But this is a spot where I don't love laying such a short price, but if they are winning about 50%, or if they're a clear favorite, then there's still value.
I still don't know how Toronto ended up beating Milwaukee last year. Like, I would really love to replay that series. Like, Toronto just had an unbelievable defensive series. So I definitely agree with you on that. If you're getting 10-1 before the start of the playoffs last year, that was fantastic.
It was the exact same exercise I ran last year that I'm doing today, where I created a consensus projection. And the Bucks, because everyone's usually slow to catch up to teams that haven't actually proven it yet. And, that's why Milwaukee's still tied with the Lakers and Clippers, because LeBron and Kawhi have rings and Giannis doesn't yet.
Yeah, and I remember some people really cashing in the first year the Warriors got good. The first year Kerr got there with the Splash Brothers too, for exactly the same thing that you mentioned, right? People don't think that they can win because they don't have that experience. Well, turns out that they were pretty good at basketball.
It's just one of those things where you can't win until you do. That is John Ewing. Make sure you find all of his work over at the Action Network. John, I do want to thank you for swinging by and spending some time talking men's college basketball and the NBA. Very much appreciated, and hopefully we can talk to you again here soon.
Yeah, and if anyone bets the Jayhawks or Bucks and they win, please send a portion of that to me.
We'll have to link your Venmo in the episode description here.
Perfect.
John, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Appreciate it.
Covering the future.
One final big thank you to John Ewing. Find him on Twitter at John Ewing, and make sure you check out all his work over at the Action Network. Ed and I always preach searching for the best value when betting on games. Well, look no further than the new odds comparison our engineers have developed over at numberFire.com. It's called OddsFire. It's the premier odds comparison experience across major bookmakers in the regulated U.S. market. Compare odds, quickly identify the best value, and even examine first-party FanDuel data all in one place. Never settle, always get the best odds. Check out the experience for free now on numberFire or at oddsfire.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Let's move now into covering the future and stick with men's college basketball. Ed, you want to focus on three-point shooting in college basketball and what we can learn from that. What are some things that we can take from that and apply to this year?
Yeah, so in college basketball, we know that the efficiency metrics are most important. So how many points you score per possession, adjusted for strength of schedule, and the same on defense. And Ken Pomeroy does a good job with all these numbers on his site. So then the question is, well, what can we know, like, in addition to that, right? Like, we have these numbers, but, what is the sources of randomness in there? And Ken's done a lot of work about the randomness of the three-point shot. Both on offense and defense. So if you look at how a team defends the three-point shot in terms of field goal percentage of the first half of conference play, that has almost no ability to predict how well that team will defend the three-point line on the defensive side for the rest of the season in conference play. And weirdly, it's the same thing is true on offense. Like how well a team shoots the beginning part of the conference season has almost no ability to predict later in the year. And it seems a little bit weird because usually when there's that lack of ability to predict something, it means that that's not a skill. That's clearly not the case with three-point shooting. I'm not trying to tell you there's no skill in shooting the ball. There is. But what it does say is that there's a lot of randomness in three-point shooting. And so, what kind of insights can you get out of that? Well, first, let's go to Kansas. They're a top-ranked team in Ken's numbers and in some of my numbers as well. They could actually be better. So one of the best players is Devin Dotson, incredibly quick guard that can get to the basket. But kind of the knock on the entire team is that they don't shoot the ball well. And Dotson is definitely not an exception to that. He's shooting about 30% this year. But I think that could get better. As a freshman last year, he shot 36%. So when you get some regression to the mean or get some regression to his skill level, at the end of the year, if you project out from now on, he in particular is probably going to shoot a little better, and he is one of the main people on their team. Maybe you can potentially see Kansas being better than even they are right now in the efficiency numbers. The second example is Kentucky. This is a team that probably is not a good shooting team, but when you look at their numbers, from three, they're shooting 31%. So that's 262nd in college basketball. That's pretty well below the mean in terms of college basketball percentage. And what this analysis said is, well, there's probably some bad luck in their shooting so far. You can kind of try to go do the same analysis, see if some of their better shooters are kind of off their skill level in terms of what they've done previous seasons. That doesn't really seem to help out Kentucky, but they're probably a bit better than they are. And, I was always interested, I had them as a very small dog against LSU last night. And, they ended up making half their three-point shots and pulling off the road win last night. So there's a lot of randomness in three-pointers. You can also look at this on the defensive side of the ball to see regression. And it just gives you a tool, like above and beyond just looking at efficiency numbers of where teams are potentially headed going into the tournament.
Is the thought process there that three-point shooting is volatile and over a small sample? Volatile. Is that the thought process there?
It's incredibly volatile. And I actually talked to Ken this morning. It's volatile on the player level as well, not just the team level. You can kind of expect with the team, you get, a lot of different people shooting. You're playing a lot of different levels of defense. randomness still plays a role even on the individual level. And you see that all the time with guys, having bad nights, having great nights. We saw that a lot with Michigan earlier this season where, they were missing their best shooter, but none of their other guys could make up for it during a stretch where they lost a bunch of games. I kind of saw it as a lack of shooting. Most other people didn't, unfortunately, but they have bounced back. And you're going to see that a lot. I mean, the three-pointer is a huge source of randomness in basketball. And that's just the way to kind of look above and beyond the efficiency numbers to get some insights.
And that's kind of stuff that you talk about a lot on our March Madness podcast, which is kind of identifying teams that may be bound for some regression, maybe overvalued because of that stuff. So definitely valuable too. Kentucky is 20-1 right now at FanDuel Sportsbook. Is that number long enough to entice you, or do you think that's appropriate? Because I can see how Kentucky is never going to really get a long number. Yeah. So even if they're due for regression, I could understand from a futures perspective, it might not be enough.
I mean, it definitely interests me. That seems definitely low. Kentucky, let me look at this. So before yesterday's game, they were 25th when I looked at efficiency. So offense and defensive points per possession adjusted for who you played. Market rankings, they're actually 14th in the nation. Okay. And you got to remember, this is a team that started, top 5 in the preseason. Right. So Calipari is always going to have the talent there. Definitely a team that can make the run. But, they haven't really shown it yet. So, is that a team that can make it, make a run? I definitely think so.
All right. So, looking for volatility and trying to exploit it in smaller samples. Definitely good takeaway for all betting, not just men's college basketball. For my covering the future, I want to talk some golf because we talked NASCAR. I talked baseball last week. Let's get some golf in here, too, because I do host a DFS show with Brandon Gadula talking daily fantasy golf. And when we were talking this week, I slowly talked myself into Patrick Reed, not from a fan perspective, because I don't think necessarily want to root for Patrick Reed all that many times, but I do think he's being undervalued in betting markets for the WGC Mexico, which tees off on Thursday. And there are a couple of routes for attacking that with him being undervalued. First, I want to discuss why I like him, and then we'll discuss some markets you could look at here. First, the main reason is that he's really well-rounded statistically. That's a big key in such a tough field. It is hard to come through if you have glaring weaknesses against Rory McIlroy, Dustin Johnson, and all those guys. And Reed doesn't really have big weaknesses. If you look at the past 50 rounds per Fantasy National, Reed is in the top 30 in the field in driving distance, strokes gained approach, and strokes gained around the green. And he's actually 14th in approach, which is the biggest number for me. So really good rating there. And he's also a good putter. Now, POA is the putting surface for this weekend. It's not his best surface, but he's still 20th there in strokes gained putting over the past 100 rounds. So a plus putter on POA in addition to the good around the green play, good approach play, decent distance. So no real holes in Reed's game. And he's had really good approach play over his past 2 events, despite kind of middling results. If we look at the past 21 events for Reed, he has a win. He has 5 top 5s. He has 9 top 10s. So he's getting good finishes, and a lot of those have come against tougher fields, which is what we have for this weekend. So that's why I like Patrick Reed. One route you could take is betting him to win outright at 41-1 at FanDuel Sportsbook. That is the official recommendation here, but you can get him longer at some books. I know Brandon bet him at 45-1. Bet365 has him at 45, so I would shop around if you want to bet him outright. But you can also bet him with some of the top guys taken out of the picture. At FanDuel Sportsbook, you can bet with Dustin Johnson, Rory McIlroy, Jon Rahm, and Justin Thomas all taken out of the pool and bet who finishes best with those guys not considered, which is big for me in this case because Reed is not in the same class as especially Rory right now. So taking those 4 guys out of the picture, it makes me more inclined to bet a golfer. And I think that's beneficial for Reed, whose number is still 29-1, even when you take those guys out of the equation. I do like that number more than the 41-1 outright. So the reason I'm not recommending that overall is I know that not every book is going to provide that. If it does, I would take a look at that number. You can bet him as a first-round leader if you want. That would not be my favorite format for him. You can do some match betting, group betting. But just broadly, I think that Patrick Reed is someone being a bit undervalued right now for the WGC Mexico, and someone I would be looking to buy into. And maybe we can get Brandon on here at some point to talk some golf, maybe before one of the majors. But Ed, any golf interest for you?
Yeah, just listening to you talk about it. I'm not much of a golf fan or bettor or numbers guy. Listening to the guys like you and Rufus. So,
yeah, Brandon's really smart. So talking to him makes me feel a lot better about this stuff. He had Adam Scott last week, and Adam Scott won. So I'd follow Brandon on Twitter at Gadula13, but he also is into Reed, so I feel pretty good about this one. Just look for your favorite market with Patrick Reed, and I would dive into that one. A lot of different ones available over at FanDuel Sportsbook. Ed, that is all we have for this week. What do you have going on over at thepowerrank.com?
Yeah, at the Power Rank, make sure you get on my email newsletter before the start of the tournament. I'll give you a cheat sheet. It's my favorite strategy, good for small pools. It's an easy way for you to fill out your bracket if you don't have a ton of time. Get that service over at thepowerrank.com/predictions. That's also the page where I've been posting a sample of my best predictions for college basketball every day. So you can definitely check that out, see what number I got. Rutgers and Michigan tonight. I just basically every day I sample some subset. I actually take all the top 25 teams and then sample the rest of the games and, I think 10 or 30% of the rest of the games, and I post them there. So it gives you a taste for, my college basketball numbers, which have been really good this year. I should talk about that some other time. I did some analysis on that this week. So I'm feeling really confident about those numbers. Check them out at thepowerrank.com/predictions.
And for Ed's book, thepowerrank.net, for a link to that. And I'd recommend that if you are like everyone else and in a tournament pool, I'd recommend that as well. Thepowerrank.net for the book. Find Ed on Twitter at thepowerrank. I am at Jim Sonnes, JimSannes. If you enjoyed the NASCAR talk last week, I'll have a NASCAR betting guide up later this week over on numberFire.com. NASCAR DFS podcast went up today, breaking down the Pennzoil 400 in Las Vegas. Also got some betting thoughts in there, too, if you want to attack it from that angle. Make sure you are subscribed to Covering the Spread wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review because, again, those help us out a ton. And thank you to those of you who have already done so. Also, big thank you to Calvin Theobald, our video producer, for keeping us on the air here today. Thank you, Cal, as always. And the final thank you to John Ewing for swinging by and talking men's college basketball in the NBA. Follow him on Twitter at John Ewing. We'll talk to you all again next week. Should be a whole lot of fun to tackle another episode of Covering the Spread. Until then, good luck with your bets. We'll talk to you again next week. This has been Covering the Spread right here on the FanDuel Podcast Network.